Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. Please join us over at rivianstories.com for all the latest Rivian news. Maybe pick up yourself a t-shirt while you're there. Thanks. We hinted at this at the close of the last conversation. It's a question or a comment that we get a lot, which is that EVs are going to crash the grid. What we want to do is respond just based on some high level, just kind of reactions. Skylar, I know that you've had this conversation before, so I think I'll kick it over to you first. But when you have a buddy say, where are you going to charge that? The EVs are going to crash the grid. What's your initial reaction, especially when you're nice and like this person?
Well, my first response is that EVs can and will actually help stabilize the grid. And there's two primary reasons for that. Number one, power demand and wholesale power cost is typically lower at night. And that is when most people charge their EVs. So it's not like EVs are making a huge hit to the grid during peak demand. And it actually helps to stabilize the grid because when demand is lower, if you keep more of the on-demand generation, so let's just say most of Texas is natural gas, you keep that power generation online and it helps stabilize the grid. The second thing that hasn't materialized quite yet in a big way, but that's vehicle to home and vehicle to grid. Once that is widely out in the market, that can even out not only your energy costs at home, if you do pay under time of use type rate plans, but it is trimming some of that demand off the grid during those peak times. In a nutshell, you can go way deeper, but the last thing that I will leave people with is that the biggest leap in demand to ever affect the power grid was when they started installing air conditioners in just about every home. And that alone, number one, there won't be an EV in every home for a very long time, but that absolutely had a more significant impact on the grid than EVs will.
Yep.
And the grid improved to meet that demand, right?
Correct. Yeah. And it can evolve again.
That's exactly my point, Skylar, is that I don't think anyone's saying that the grid that's around today is going to stay exactly the same. And maybe it could get further than we imagine it with the two things that Skylar just said, about helping it stabilize and keeping it more efficient and off-peak. But there's so much improvement we can make, especially even with the whole battery solution of storage. I mean, when you look at solar and wind and how to make that really effective is to be able to store that for later use. So you have some countries, I know Australia is big, where they have these big Tesla battery farms. And they're looking at powering whole communities based on solar, wind, and just these batteries. I'm not saying that that's like the only way of the future, but it's going to be a lot of different technologies to help us get to that future place that we need to in 10 and 20 years. And we've got time, and maybe we need every day of it. And that's fine. But like Skylar said, this isn't going to happen overnight as far as EV adoption or grid improvements in terms of capacity and or efficiency. Probably we'll have both of those.
Yeah. This talk kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you guys saw that segment that Kyle Connor did with an EV charging company called FreeWire. It was pretty wild. The chargers actually have batteries in them, and then the actual EVSEs charge just on 220. It's not 400, 500,000 kilo, it's not the huge power stations that we have at most EVSE stations. So these chargers are able to charge on 220, way wider on the grid than, again, these larger Tesla superchargers or EV Go or Electrify America stations that charge the batteries at these stations, and they're still able to deliver 200 plus kilowatts of power to your truck, and then charge back up off of 220 at the same time. It's honestly a super sweet way into getting more charging locations into areas quicker with less red tape and less everything, honestly, just to get them out there quicker.
100%. And I think that whether it is an integrated solution like FreeWire, or whether it is more energy storage deployed at charging stations or distribute across the grid, I think that's going to help a lot. And the numbers, if I'm not mistaken, on that FreeWire, Jimmy, is, yeah, it takes in about 20 kilowatts of power, yet it's able to output over 150 because of the battery storage. And so that's a big difference in the amount of power capacity and infrastructure that you have to deploy.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize too, at Electrify America stations, they use, some of them, not all of them, have Tesla power walls as storage. So even if you had an instance where the grid might be down in your area due to a hurricane or a natural disaster, it won't last forever, but there's still the ability to charge even with no power due to the battery storage at the EVSEs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually the NEVI program, the federal funding for all of the EV charging infrastructure out of the infrastructure bill, they do want those charging locations to have a priority grid designation in the case of emergency evacuations or people needing to get places when there might be grid issues.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle, I'd also open it up to the audience and ask, hey, are there certain topics or certain facets of this that the audience would like to know more about? If so, put them in the comments and maybe we can do some research and talk about it on a future segment.
Yeah, that's a great call. Another thing that I was going to mention similar to that was, hey, maybe there is someone that has some expertise in this that we could bring on and interview if this is something that people want to know or learn more about. Because it can be somewhat interesting just to think about the future of energy in general from a very, very high level overview. And so the idea of being able to capture energy in new ways and convert it into electricity is a huge pro for EVs. There's just many ways you can generate electricity. It's not just a clean coal plant. It's not just wind and solar. It's nuclear, it's all that stuff. So all the different ways to generate electricity is so much better. And then all the places we could get electricity is so much more abundant as well, from a home to a fast charger to a level 2, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of upside with electricity in general. And I have 100% confidence that they're going to figure it out as far as how to make that scale. And I think at the end, it's just going to be a huge benefit. We'll wonder how we ever lived without it, All right, that's all for this one. We have more coming, so please subscribe. In the meantime, we hang out at rivianstories.com. Click on shop, find yourself a t-shirt. Thanks so much for your support.